The dining room went silent.
Reconsider your position on this.
Not the polite silence of a pause between conversations. Not the brief, forgettable quiet that fills a room when someone drops a fork. This was the kind of silence that makes every person in a space feel like they have just witnessed something they were never supposed to see. The kind that sits in your chest and doesn't leave. Julian Blackwood was staring at the waitress. His jaw was tight. His knuckles, wrapped around the stem of his wine glass, had gone white. And the woman standing in front of him, calm, steady, a tray balanced perfectly in one hand, had just said something that had turned the entire room into a held breath. One word. That was all it took. But that is not where this story begins. It begins 40 minutes earlier, when Julian Blackwood walked into La Maison like he owned it. Because to him, he did. Every room he entered belonged to him. Every conversation was his to control. Every person in his orbit was a prop, and he moved them with the casual ease of a man who had never once been told no. He was 43. Sharp suit, sharper smile. The kind of handsome that money refines over decades. Not the raw, untamed kind, but the polished, deliberate kind. The kind that says, I have looked at myself in mirrors worth more than your car, and I have decided I am satisfied. His fiancée, Elaine, walked half a step behind him. She was beautiful in the way Julian preferred. Quiet, composed, like a painting hung in the right light. She wore a cream dress and a thin gold necklace, and an expression that had long since stopped being nervous and had become something closer to practiced. They were seated at the corner table. The best table. Julian never sat anywhere else. He scanned the menu with the bored confidence of someone who already knew what he was going to order, but wanted the ritual of pretending he didn't. The restaurant was the kind of place where the bread was warm and the lighting was amber, and the silence between courses felt intentional, like the chef had choreographed it. And then she appeared. The waitress. Young. Black. A name tag pinned to her chest that read, Amara. Her shoes were scuffed, not the kind of worn that comes from long shifts, but the kind that comes from not being able to afford new ones. Her uniform was pressed, but her hands were steady in the way that hands are steady when they have carried weight for a long time, and have learned to do it without trembling. Julian looked at her the way he looked at furniture. Good evening, she said. Warm, professional. Can I start you off with something to drink? Julian didn't answer right away. He let the pause stretch, not because he was thinking, but because he wanted her to feel it. The weight of being made to wait by someone who didn't think she deserved his time. Then he smiled. It was not a kind smile. Welcome to True Spark Stories. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on this story and where you are watching from. You know, sometimes life has a funny way of testing us right when we think we've hit rock bottom. Now let's continue. Julian leaned back in his chair, crossed one leg over the other, and began to speak. But the words that came out of his mouth were not English. They were Old French, not the clean, modern French that a Parisian might use, but a thick, archaic Provençal dialect, the kind that even most French speakers would struggle to follow. The kind Julian had spent years studying specifically because it was obscure, specifically because it was a weapon. He ordered a bottle of wine, a very specific vintage, and he did it slowly, deliberately, watching Amara's face the entire time, waiting for the flicker. The confusion, the embarrassment of being spoken to in a language she couldn't understand, in front of other diners, in front of Elaine, in a room where everyone was watching. It was a trick he had used. Before. More than once. The idea was simple. Strip someone of their ability to respond, and you strip them of their dignity. Make them feel small in public, and they carry that smallness home with them. Elaine glanced at Julian. A small smile. She had seen this before. She knew what he was doing, and she did nothing. Amara didn't flinch. That was the first thing Julian should have noticed. But he didn't. He was too busy enjoying the sound of his own voice, the way the words curled out of his mouth like smoke, filling the space between them. He watched her eyes. He was looking for the moment she would break, the small, involuntary shift that people make when they realize they are being made to feel stupid in front of strangers. It didn't come. She stood there, tray in hand, and listened. Not the way someone listens when they are lost. The way someone listens when they are choosing the right moment to speak. Julian finished his order. He leaned back again, satisfied with himself, and took a slow sip of water. Elaine dabbed at her napkin. The table next to them, a couple in their 50s, old money, the kind of people who vacation in places that don't have names on Google, shifted their gaze just enough to notice that something was happening at Julian's table. Julian looked at Amara again, still waiting for the crack. "Did you understand me?" he asked, switching back to English now, his tone light, almost amused. The way someone asks a child if they understood a joke they were never meant to hear. Amara tilted her head, just slightly, the way a person does when they are deciding whether to be patient or honest. "I understood you," she said. Julian blinked. He hadn't expected that. Not fully. He recovered quickly, he always did, and laughed. A short, dry laugh that was meant to say, "Of course you didn't." But something had shifted behind his eyes, something small and uncomfortable, like a splinter he couldn't quite locate. "Then bring the wine," he said. Still in English, still casual, but his voice had lost something, just a fraction of its edge. Amara nodded and turned to leave. She walked through the dining room the way she always did, shoulders back, tray steady, invisible to everyone who wasn't paying attention. But Julian was paying attention now, and so was Elaine. Elaine watched the waitress disappear into the kitchen and then turned back to Julian. Her expression hadn't changed, but her fingers had stopped moving against the napkin. She was still. "She said she understood you," Elaine said, quietly, not a question. "She didn't," Julian said. "People say things like that to save face." "Did she look like she was saving face to you?" Julian didn't answer. He picked up the menu again, even though he had already ordered, and pretended to read it. The truth was, in 20 years of using that trick, the dialect, the deliberate incomprehension, the public smallness, no one had ever said that to him, not once. They stammered, they apologized, they called for a manager. They did anything except stand still and say, "I understood you," with the calm certainty of someone who meant it. It unsettled him, more than he wanted to admit. Amara returned with the wine. She set the bottle on the table with practiced ease, opened it, poured a tasting portion into Julian's glass. He swirled it, sniffed it, tasted it, nodded without looking at her, and she poured for the table. It was during this, the quiet ritual of wine being poured, that Julian decided to push again. He couldn't help it. It was the same impulse that had built his empire, the need to find the edge of something and press against it until it broke. "Tell me, Amara," he said. And the way he said her name made it sound like a joke, like something small and unimportant, What do you do when you're not here? Do you have family? A home? It was cruel in the way that only people who have never been poor can be cruel about poverty. Casual, throwaway, like he was asking about the weather. Elaine set down her glass. Her jaw tightened, just barely, just enough for someone watching closely to see. But she said nothing. Amara looked at Julian, and for the first time, something changed in her expression. Not anger, not hurt. Something quieter than both of those things. Something that looked, if you were watching closely enough, like pity. "I have everything I need," she said. Julian smirked. "I'm sure you do." He turned to Elaine, ready to move the conversation back to himself, back to the center of the room, where he belonged. But Amara hadn't left yet. She was still standing there. And she was looking at him with an expression that Julian Blackwood had never seen directed at him in his entire life. She was looking at him like she already knew something he didn't. The appetizers arrived. Julian ate without tasting them. He was distracted now, not visibly, not in any way the other diners would have caught. But Elaine noticed. She always noticed. It was one of the reasons Julian had chosen her. She was observant enough to be useful and quiet enough to never make that a problem. "You're not yourself," she said, cutting a piece of foie gras with surgical precision. "I'm fine," Julian said. "You haven't touched your phone in 10 minutes. He looked at her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't judging. She was simply stating a fact, the way she always did, and letting him decide what to do with it. "Something about that woman," he said. And even as the words left his mouth, he felt how small they sounded. "She's odd. She's a waitress, Julian." She looked at me like she knew something. Elaine set down her fork. "People look at you all the time. You're not always right about what it means." That landed. Julian felt it, a small, sharp sting, like a paper cut he hadn't noticed until he touched it. But he didn't react. He never reacted to Elaine. That was another reason he had chosen her. She was the only person in his life who could say something like that and not be punished for it. Not because he was generous, because he needed someone, somewhere, who told him the truth, even if he didn't always listen. The main course came. Julian ordered for both of them, another habit, another small act of control. Elaine didn't object. She never did, at least not here, not in public. And then Amara was back. She refilled Julian's water. She adjusted the position of Elaine's plate by half an inch, a tiny, instinctive act of care that no one asked for, but that made the table feel, somehow, more settled. And then she paused. She paused the way a person pauses when they have decided something. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. Julian looked up. He hadn't told her his name. The realization hit him slowly, like cold water rising. He hadn't introduced himself. He never introduced himself to waitstaff. There was no reservation in his name tonight. He had called in a favor, booked through a friend. The name tag on her chest said Amara. His said nothing. So how did she know? "I'm sorry," he said, and the words came out sharper than he intended. "How do you know my name?" Amara didn't answer. Not directly. She simply looked at him, held his gaze with a steadiness that made the air between them feel different. Charged, like the moment before a storm. And then she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not an enemy's smile either. It was the smile of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a door to open. And it finally has. Elaine's hand moved to the table. Her fingers pressed flat against the white linen. She was watching Amara now with an expression that had shifted from curiosity to something tighter, something that looked like recognition. "Elaine," Julian said, not taking his eyes off the waitress. "Do you know this woman?" Elaine didn't answer. The silence stretched. The couple at the next table had gone quiet. The sommelier, who had been moving toward them with a second bottle, stopped mid-step, as though he too had felt the shift in the room's gravity. Julian's heart was beating faster now. He could feel it in his throat, in his fingertips. He was not used to feeling anything other than in control. This, whatever this was, felt like the ground moving beneath him, and he didn't know how to stop it. "Amara," he said, and this time his voice was not dismissive. It was not a joke. It was the voice of a man who has just realized he might be standing in a room he didn't fully understand. "Who are you?" She tilted her head again, that same small motion, patient, unhurried. "You already know the answer to that," she said. "You just don't remember asking the question. If you're still watching up to now, type 'I'm still here' in the comment section." Julian's mind was moving fast now, flipping through faces, through years, through the hundreds of people who had crossed his path and disappeared like smoke. He was searching for her, for this woman, this Amara, this person who stood in front of him with scuffed shoes and a name tag, and the eyes of someone who had been watching him for a very long time. His chest felt tight. His mouth was dry. He reached for his water glass, and his hand was not steady, and he hated himself for it, because Julian Blackwood did not shake. Julian Blackwood did not lose composure. Julian Blackwood did not sit in the middle of a restaurant and feel afraid of a woman who made $12 an hour. But that was the thing. She didn't make $12 an hour. He could feel it now, the wrongness of the picture, the way a painting looks when you notice the frame is crooked. Everything about her was a costume. Everything about this evening was staged, and he was the only one in the room, who hadn't been told. And then Elaine spoke. Her voice was quiet, steady, but it carried the weight of something that had been held back for months, maybe longer. "Julian," she said, "sit down." "I am sitting down." "Then stop standing up inside yourself and listen to me." Her eyes were locked on his. "You know exactly who she is. You just don't want to." The room had gone completely still. Not the silence of politeness. The silence of a room that knows it is watching something private come undone in public and cannot look away. Julian's hands were on the table, flat, pressed down, the way a man presses his hands against a surface when he's trying to hold himself in place. "Elaine," he said. His voice had changed. The performance was gone. What was left underneath sounded younger, smaller, almost afraid. "What is this?" Elaine didn't answer him. She was looking at Amara now, and her expression had shifted into something Julian had never seen on her face before. It wasn't guilt. It was resolve. Amara set the tray down on the edge of the table. Gently, deliberately, the way you set something down when you no longer need it, when the role you have been playing is finished. She reached up and unclipped the name tag from her chest, held it between her thumb and forefinger for a moment. Then she set it on the table next to Julian's plate. "Amara." He stared at it. "That's not my name," she said, quietly. "You already know that too." Julian swallowed. The room was pressing in on him now. The amber light, the white linen, the eyes of every person in La Maison turned toward his table like plants turning toward the sun. He had spent his entire life being the center of every room. He had wanted it, built his empire on it. But this was different. This was not admiration. This was exposure. "Then who?" he started. "My name is Amara Osei," she said. And then she paused. Let the name sit in the air. Between them, Julian's face changed. It was not a dramatic change. It was not the way a face changes in movies. The wide eyes, the gasping breath, the staggered step backward. It was slower than that. Quieter. It was the way a face changes when something inside it shifts permanently. When a wall that has been holding back years of buried knowledge finally cracks, and everything behind it starts to flood through at once. Osei. He knew that name. He knew it the way you know the sound of something breaking, instinctively, before you even turn to look. 7 years ago, Julian Blackwood had made a decision. A business decision, he had told himself. Clean, rational, necessary. He had acquired a small pharmaceutical company in West Africa, a company that had been founded by a man named David Osei, a man who had spent 15 years developing a drug, a real drug, not a marketing gimmick, that could have changed the trajectory of millions of lives. Julian had bought the company, and then he had buried the drug. Quietly, efficiently, because the drug would have cut into the margins of 3 other companies he held shares in. Because profit was the only language Julian Blackwood had ever truly spoken. David Osei had fought back. Publicly, desperately. He had gone to the press, to regulators, to anyone who would listen. No one did. Julian's lawyers had dismantled him, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to dismantle. David Osei had lost everything. His company, his reputation, his health. He had died 14 months later, and Julian Blackwood had not lost a single night of sleep. Until tonight. "You knew," Julian said. His voice was barely above a whisper now. "You knew who I was the entire time." "Yes," Amara said. "How long have you?" 3 months, she said. "I got a job here 3 months ago. I waited. I waited for you to come in, because I knew you would. Men like you always come back to rooms like this. It's where you feel safe." Julian opened his mouth, closed it. He had nothing. For the first time in his adult life, Julian Blackwood had absolutely nothing to say. Elaine stood up. She moved slowly, deliberately, the way she did everything. She picked up her bag from the back of the chair. She smoothed her dress. And then she turned to face Julian. And she spoke with the clarity of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for a very long time. "I know about David Osei," she said. "I've known for 6 months. I found the internal memos, the ones you thought you deleted." Julian stared at her. "Elaine, don't," she said. And the single word stopped him cold. "I'm not doing this for her. I'm not doing this for justice. I'm doing this because I looked at you tonight. The way you spoke to this woman, the way you looked at her shoes and her name tag and decided she was nothing. And I realized I have been watching you do this my entire life. To everyone. And I have been standing right here, letting it happen." She set her ring on the table. It landed with a quiet, precise sound, like a period at the end of a sentence that had taken years to write. "I'm done letting it happen," she said. She didn't look back. She walked through the dining room, past the couple at the next table, past the sommelier, past the hostess who had seen everything and said nothing. And she disappeared through the front door without a sound. The room exhaled. Julian sat there, alone now. The wine glass in front of him was still half full. The food was still warm. The lighting was still amber. Everything in the room was exactly the same as it had been 20 minutes ago. and nothing in it was the same at all. Amara Ose, stood beside his table for one more moment. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. She had come here for one thing, to make sure Julian Blackwood knew exactly who he had destroyed and exactly what it had cost. Not in a courtroom, not in the press. In a quiet room, in front of people who mattered to him, in a language he couldn't control. She picked up the tray, tucked the name tag into her pocket, and walked back toward the kitchen, steady and unhurried, the way she had walked in. Julian looked down at the table, at the ring, at the name tag, at the glass of wine he no longer wanted to drink. He thought about calling someone, his lawyer, his publicist, his assistant, anyone who could fix this, spin this, make it go away the way everything else always went away. But no one was coming. He understood that now. The ring was on the table, cold and final. Elaine's chair was empty, still angled the way she had left it. A small, quiet evidence that someone had been there and chosen to leave. The other diners were not looking at him anymore. They had seen enough. They would talk about this night for years, in other restaurants, at other tables, the way people talk about witnessing, something they were not prepared for. Julian Blackwood, they would say. The man who thought no one could touch him. And then someone did. He picked up his phone, put it back down, picked up the wine glass, set it aside without drinking. His hands were still not steady, and he folded them together on the table to hide it, the way a child hides something broken behind his back and hopes no one notices. But for the first time, he understood that some things cannot be fixed. Some things can only be felt. And Julian Blackwood, for the first time in 43 years, had nothing left to say. That's the end of this story. If this story moved you, hit the subscribe button so you never miss another True Spark story. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were Amara? And tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. See you in the next one.